My name is Holly Berry. I'm 28 years old. A few months ago, I flew over 3,000 miles back to Boston for my sister Victoria's wedding. But at the Grand Hotel lobby, the staff looked confused. They flipped through the guest list once, twice, then looked at me with pity. "I'm sorry, your name isn't on the list of 400 guests." I called my sister. She scoffed through the phone. "Did you really think you were invited? Go back to your cheap barracks. You'll always be a stain on this family." I quietly placed a small silver box among the mountains of designer gifts and walked away. Hours later, when Victoria opened it in front of Boston's elite, she saw what was inside, and she hasn't stopped calling me since. But I never answer. Before I reveal the weapon at the bottom of that silver box, take a moment to like and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy this story. Leave a comment telling me which state you're listening from. Now, to understand why this counterattack was so devastating, we have to go back to the moment I realized I was never really a part of this family. The gold trim of the Grand Belmont fades. The smell of lilies and the concierge's pity melt away, replaced by a different kind of cold. A cold that started 18 years ago in a kitchen in Beacon Hill. It was my 10th birthday. I sat on a high mahogany stool, my boots hooked over the bottom rung, staring at the granite island. The stone was white, streaked with gray, and felt like a slab of ice against my bare thighs. There were no balloons, no smell of vanilla cake, just the low hum of a high-end refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that seemed to mock the silence. My father, Harold, marched into the room. He smelled like expensive coffee and leather. His briefcase snapped shut, a sharp final sound that echoed off the high ceilings. He didn't look at me. He didn't even slow down. "Harold," I whispered, "it's today." He paused, his hand on the heavy oak door. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a bill, and flicked it onto the granite. A $20 bill. It fluttered, landing near the sink. "Get yourself something, Holly," he said, his voice as dry as autumn leaves. "Don't spend it on junk. I've got a meeting with the board. Don't be late for school." The door thudded shut. I stared at the bill. I reached out and ran my thumb over the wrinkles in the paper, smoothing them out against the cold stone. $20. The price of his absence. Then came the heels. Sharp, rhythmic, like a countdown. My mother, Patricia, walked in, her phone pressed to her ear. She was wearing a silk robe, her wrist heavy with gold bangles that clicked like a rattlesnake every time she moved. "No, the silk needs a tighter stitch," she snapped into the phone. "Victoria's gala dress has to be perfect. The Hartwell collection requires a certain presence." I stood up, my heart thudding in my throat. I reached out and caught the edge of her sleeve. Just a tiny tug. "Mom, you said we'd go to the bakery. You promised." Patricia didn't look down. She just jerked her arm away as if I were covered in grease. "Not now, Holly," she hissed, her eyes locked on the screen of her phone. "I'm busy. Victoria has a fitting at noon. Go play in the yard or something. We'll do something later." "But later is—" "I said later." She turned and floated out of the room, her bracelet still rattling. I stood there, a 10-year-old ghost in a house full of people who refused to see me. The kitchen felt larger then, too big for one girl and a crumpled 20. Then, I heard it. The rhythmic thump-tap of a cane on the hardwood. Grandmother Eleanor stood in the doorway. She was 70 then, but she stood straighter than any man I'd ever met. Her eyes weren't soft. They were gray, like the Atlantic before a storm. And they looked at me with a terrifying clarity. She looked at the empty kitchen, the lack of cake, and the $20 bill on the counter. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." In our family, "I'm sorry" was a foreign language. She walked toward me, her footsteps heavy and deliberate. From the pocket of her tweed blazer, she pulled out a thick, cracked leather strap. At the end of it hung a heavy piece of silver, a vintage military camera, an old Leica, battered and scarred from a dozen battlefields. She looped the strap over my neck. The weight of it nearly pulled me forward. It felt real. It felt heavy. It felt like a burden I was finally allowed to carry. "Stop looking for a ghost that isn't there, Holly," she said, her voice gravelly and low. I looked up at her. Her hand, gnarled and strong, rested on my shoulder. They won't see you, she continued. Not unless you make them. You've got a sniper's eye, girl. Use it. Look at the world through this little hole. Filter out the trash. Record the truth. Because people lie, but a lens remembers exactly what they tried to hide. I lifted the camera. It was freezing against my cheek. I looked through the viewfinder. The kitchen changed. The vast, lonely space narrowed down to a single frame. Outside on the patio, the glass doors revealed Patricia and Victoria. Victoria was laughing, twirling in a white dress that cost more than my father's car. Patricia was smiling, a real smile, adjusting the lace on Victoria's shoulder. They looked like a picture-perfect family. Except I wasn't in the frame. I adjusted the focus until their faces were sharp, catching the sunlight. I saw the glint of the gold bracelets. I saw the way Patricia looked at Victoria with an adoration I'd never tasted. Click. The shutter snapped shut, a sharp, mechanical sound. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The wall didn't just go up, it was reinforced with steel. I didn't cry, I didn't beg anymore. I just kept the camera to my eye, watching them from the shadows. I was no longer a victim of their silence. I was the one documenting their downfall. I looked at the silver camera in my small hands and felt the first spark of a fire that would eventually burn their world to the ground. "Ready, Major," Eleanor whispered. I didn't answer. I just looked through the lens and waited for the next shot. The smell of Brasso is something you never forget. It's sharp, metallic, and smells like a lie. I was in my dorm room at West Point. The morning sun crawled across the gray stone walls, cold and uninviting. On my bed lay the dress blue uniform, stiff wool, high collar, gold buttons that I'd spent 3 hours polishing until they looked like tiny, burning suns. This was the finish line. 4 years of hell. 4 years of rucksacks that tore my shoulders, of 5-mile runs in the freezing rain, and of being broken down just to be built back up. I was 22, and today I was becoming an officer in the United States Army. My hands were steady as I pinned the brass on my lapels. My spine was a steel rod. I looked in the mirror and didn't see the ghost from the Beacon Hill kitchen anymore. I saw a soldier. I thought, maybe this time. Maybe a commission from the most prestigious military academy in the world is enough to make them proud. Then the phone on the nightstand buzzed. Harold. I picked it up on the second ring. I didn't say, hello, I waited. That's a habit you pick up here. Never give ground unless you have to. Holly, my father's voice came through. It was flat. No warmth, no congratulations, just a statement of fact. The family won't be making it to the ceremony. I gripped the phone. My knuckles went white, but my voice stayed level. The ceremony starts in 2 hours, Dad. I've got a seat saved in the front row. Change of plans, he said. I could hear the clink of silverware in the background. They were probably at brunch, some high-end place with white tablecloths and $10 mimosas. Victoria has a networking mixer with a director from Goldman Sachs. It's a huge opportunity, career-making stuff. You understand. I understood. I understood that a handshake in a corporate office meant more to him than his younger daughter's oath to the Constitution. Besides, he added, and I could practically hear the shrug. It's just the Army, Holly. We've talked about this. Playing soldier in the mud, it ain't a real career for someone with the Barry name. It's for kids who can't get into the Ivy League. In the background, a high-pitched laugh cut through the line. Victoria. Tell her to look sharp in her little costume, she chirped. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just pressed the red button and watched the screen go dark. I stood there in the silence, the weight of the wool uniform suddenly feeling like lead. I walked over to my desk, took my civilian phone, and tossed it into the bottom of my locker. The ceremony was a blur of brass bands and booming PA systems. I stood on the plain, the massive parade field, surrounded by a sea of white caps and shouting families. Everywhere I looked, there were hugs. Fathers beaming with pride, mothers crying as they pinned the gold bars on their sons' shoulders. When it was my turn to walk across the stage, the announcer's voice echoed, Second Lieutenant Holly Berry. I marched forward. I kept my eyes locked on the horizon. But as I passed the section reserved for the Berry family, I couldn't help it. I looked. 4 empty chairs, a hole in the crowd that felt like a crater. But then, a movement caught my eye. In the very back, far from the VIP sections, a small figure stood up. It was Eleanor. 74 years old, leaning heavily on her walnut cane, wearing a dark coat despite the heat. She was the only one standing. Her hands, thin and spotted with age, came together. Clap, clap, clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound. It wasn't loud, but in my head, it was deafening. She didn't smile, she just nodded once. A commander acknowledging a soldier. After the ceremony, she found me near the statue of Washington. She didn't give me a hug. She just reached out and pinned the gold bars of a second lieutenant onto my shoulders. Her fingers were rough, but her touch was steady. She leaned in, pulling me down until our foreheads almost touched. She smelled like peppermint and old paper. "Come on now, look at me," she whispered. Her Atlantic gray eyes were burning. "This house is a sinking ship, Holly, and they're all too drunk on their own vanity to see the water rising. You listen to me. Go. Pack your gear and don't you dare look back." "I'm being deployed, Grandma. I'm leaving for Pendleton tomorrow, then overseas." "Good," she said, her grip tightening on my arm. "Forget this address. Forget their voices. Let them think you're a ghost. You stay in the shadows until you hold the trump card. You hear me? Don't show your hand until you're ready to take the whole damn table." I nodded. "I hear you." "Now get out of here," she said, pushing me away. "You got a war to win. Your own war." 24 hours later, I was standing in the gravel parking lot of a transit hub. The air was thick with the smell of diesel exhaust and damp asphalt. A line of olive-drab buses waited to take us to the airfield. I had my rucksack on my back. It weighed 80 pounds, but it felt lighter than the Berry name ever had. I took one last look at my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I pulled the SIM card out, snapped it in half, and dropped it into a trash can overflowing with empty coffee cups. If you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, the one who worked 10 times harder just to be ignored, hit that like button for me right now. Drop the word soldier in the comments if you've ever had to walk your path alone. Let's show the world how many of us are out there. I stepped onto the bus. The doors hissed shut behind me with a sound like a final breath. Radio silence had officially begun. And it would stay that way for 10 long years. The sand in Iraq ain't like the sand on Cape Cod. It's finer. It's a gray, choking dust that gets in your teeth, your eyes, and the deepest parts of your soul. It tastes like copper and old exhaust. I spent 3 tours breathing it in while the rest of the world forgot we were even there. I was hunched in the back of a Black Hawk, the rotors screaming overhead like a chorus of banshees. My camera, the silver Leica Grandma Eleanor gave me, was tucked tight against my chest. The leather strap was soaked with a decade's worth of my own sweat. We were flying low over a village that didn't want us there, and my radio was buzzing with tactical chatter. Then, my personal phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a voicemail. Victoria. I checked it back at the base while I was cleaning a shrapnel nick on my forearm. Her voice was thin and shrill, echoing through the empty barracks. "Holly, you won't believe the day I'm having," she whined. "I went to the salon, and the girl, I swear she was new, she chipped my middle nail right before my gala. And then Mom told me the airline bumped me to premium economy for the Paris trip. Can you believe the disrespect? I'm literally shaking right now." I looked at the blood on my bandage. I looked at the grit under my fingernails. I didn't say a word. I just hit delete. Every cent of my hazard pay went into a separate account. I didn't buy a truck. I didn't go on benders during leave. While the other soldiers were hitting the bars in Oceanside, I was sitting on a cold steel bunk bed at Camp Pendleton. The only light in the room came from my laptop screen. I wasn't just a soldier. I was a student of the lens. I knew how to see things before they happened. I knew how to capture the kind of truth that powerful people wanted to buy. I registered the business at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday. Name, Everlight Studios. My first client was a defense contractor who needed high-res documentation of field equipment. I did the work of 4 men. I worked until my eyes burned and my fingers were stiff. I was building a fortress, one brick of cold, hard cash at a time. 5 years later, the sand was gone, but the grit remained. I stood in my office in Los Angeles. It was a cage of reinforced glass and polished steel, 30 floors above the smog. The only sound was the low, constant hum of the server quads in the back room. Everlight Studios wasn't a side hustle anymore. It was an empire. I had 12 people on my payroll. I just signed a $3 million contract with a global tech firm. I kept the name Barry, not for Harold, not for Patricia. I kept it so that when I finally burned their house down, they'd know exactly whose name was on the matches. My private line buzzed. A text from my mother. Holly, Victoria's credit card is over the limit again. She needs $5,000 for the venue deposit. You're doing so well in LA. Surely you can help your sister. Family sticks together. I looked at the contract on my desk. I looked at the city lights. I felt nothing but a cold, sharp clarity. I hit the delete button without a second thought. They only called when they needed a bridge to walk over. I was done being their floor. I walked over to the window. The sun was setting over the Pacific, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise. I felt the weight of the silence I'd maintained for 10 years. Radio silence wasn't just a tactic, it was my sanctuary. Then, a sharp, rhythmic knock at my office door broke the quiet. I didn't have to look to know it was official. That kind of knock only comes from a man who wears a uniform. Captain Miller walked in. He didn't look at the expensive furniture or the view. He kept his back straight, his eyes fixed on a point just above my head. He held a small yellow slip of paper, a Red Cross message. "Major Barry," he said, his voice dropping into that formal, hollow tone used for the dead. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "I'm sorry to inform you, Eleanor Barry passed away this morning." The glass walls of my office suddenly felt thin, like they could shatter with one wrong breath. Grandma Eleanor, the only person who saw the steel in me when I was just a girl in a silent kitchen, the only one who told me to wait until I had the trump card. "She left specific instructions for you," Miller said, handing me a small sealed envelope. "The funeral is in 48 hours, Boston." I took the paper. My hands didn't shake. 10 years of training made sure of that. But inside, the wall I'd built was starting to crack. "Thank you, Captain," I said. He saluted. I returned it out of habit. When he left, I reached into my desk and pulled out a locked case. Inside was my green beret. I smoothed the fabric. I felt the weight of it. Eleanor had told me not to look back until I was ready to take the whole table. I looked at the screen of my computer, a gallery of wedding photos for a billionaire's daughter. Perfectly framed, perfectly fake, just like the world I was about to return to. I picked up the phone and called my assistant. "Book a flight to Logan Airport, one way," I said. "Is everything okay, boss?" "No," I replied, looking at the silver camera sitting on my desk. The war just moved to a new front. I put on my coat and walked out. The elevator doors slid shut with a metallic hiss, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't running away from Boston. I was coming for it. The wolves were waiting at the funeral, but they didn't know I was bringing the fire. Boston air in the fall hits like a rusty razor. It's a damp, bone-chilling cold that creeps under your collar and stays there. I stepped out of the black SUV in front of Trinity Church, the heavy gray sky hanging over the city like a slab of wet concrete. Inside, the air was thick. A suffocating mix of expensive candle wax and way too much Tom Ford perfume. The kind of smell that covers up the scent of decay. I didn't sit in the front. I didn't want the preferred seating. I took a spot in the shadows, back against a cold stone pillar. I was in my dark dress uniform, every crease sharp enough to cut, every metal earned in blood. I stood at attention, even while sitting. My back stayed off the wood. My eyes stayed on the perimeter. Up front, the Barry family was putting on a hell of a show. My mother, Patricia, was draped in black lace that probably cost more than a mid-sized sedan. She was dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, but her gaze was constantly shifting, scanning the crowd to see who had shown up. She wasn't mourning, she was counting the social capital. Then there was Victoria. She was front and center, wearing a veil that made her look like a tragic queen in a low-budget movie. She looked like she was auditioning for a role. Every sob was timed. Every tilt of her head was calculated for the cameras of the friends she'd invited to turn her grandmother's funeral into a networking event. I watched them. My mind went into tactical mode. Behavioral analysis, high. Sincerity, 0. Risk factor, total. To them, I was just a dark shape in the corner, a ghost they'd tried to exorcise 10 years ago. They looked right through me. After the service, the crowd moved toward the mahogany casket. The line was long, full of Boston's elite, people who smelled like old money and new secrets. I waited until the room cleared a little before I moved. I stood by the casket. Eleanor looked peaceful. Her hands were folded over her chest, the skin like translucent paper. She was finally free of them. Then I heard a rustle of silk behind me. "Don't get too close, Holly. You'll get lint on the velvet." Victoria's voice was a sharp whisper, dripping with venom. She didn't look at me. She was busy adjusting her veil in the reflection of the polished wood. My mother stepped up beside her. She didn't acknowledge me either. It was like I was a piece of furniture that didn't fit the decor. "Mom," Victoria hissed, her eyes darting to the pearls Eleanor was wearing. The Hartwell set. "You saw the list, right?" "I'm gonna wear the necklace for the rehearsal dinner. It's perfect for the neckline of my dress. Grandma wouldn't want it sitting in a box." Patricia nodded, her face a mask of practiced grief. "I know, honey. We'll handle the inventory tonight. Lawson is meeting us at the house. He knows how things work. Everything goes to the direct line." "Good," Victoria smirked, a tiny, ugly thing behind her veil. "I ain't letting some back-alley military auction house get their hands on our legacy. It belongs on me." They stood there, 3 feet away from a dead woman, dividing her skin like wolves over a carcass. They didn't even wait for the dirt to hit the lid. I sipped the cold air. My jaw was locked so tight I thought my teeth might crack. I didn't say a word. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. To a soldier, an enemy who reveals their greed is an enemy who's already lost. I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. "Major Barry." A man stepped out from behind a stone archway. Harrison Lawson. He looked exactly like he did 10 years ago. Sharp suit, smell of peppermint and old law books, and eyes that saw everything. He was Eleanor's oldest friend. "Lawson," I said, my voice sounding like gravel after the silence. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. It was sealed with heavy red wax. The seal looked like a fresh wound against the white paper. "Eleanor gave this to me 6 months ago," he whispered. His voice was low, urgent. "She said if she went, I was to give this to you immediately. Not to the house, not to the parents, just you." I took it. The envelope was heavy. It had a weight that felt like a loaded weapon. "She was very specific, Holly," Lawson said, his eyes scanning the hallway for my sister. "She said, 'Tell the major to wait. Don't open it until you're alone. And tell her, the hunt doesn't start until the prey thinks it's won.'" I nodded once, short, sharp. "Understood." I walked out of the church, the Boston wind whipping my coat around my legs. I got into my rental car, a nondescript silver sedan, and drove 2 blocks away. I pulled over under a dying elm tree. The wax seal snapped under my thumb. Inside was a stack of notarized documents. My eyes scanned the legalese, looking for the payload. Then I found it. Item 1. The Hartwell Jewelry Collection. Appraisal value, $2.3 million. Status, bequeathed in its entirety to Holly Berry. There was a small handwritten note clipped to the back. Eleanor's handwriting was jagged, full of the same steel she'd lived with. "Holly," the note read. "Victoria looks at these stones and sees trophies. You look at them and see a legacy. Let her plan her wedding. Let her tell the world she's the heir. Let her vanity build the gallows. Keep your mouth shut, Keep your back straight and let her pride pull the lever. That's an order, Major. I looked at the documents. I looked at the church spire in the rearview mirror. I felt a cold, dark satisfaction settle into my chest. Victoria was back there right now, probably picking out which earrings she was going to steal first. She thought she was the queen of the board. She didn't realize she was just a target. I folded the papers and locked them in my briefcase. The metallic click of the lock sounded like a hammer dropping on a chambered round. Mission accepted, Grandma, I whispered to the empty car. I put the car in gear and pulled back into the gray Boston traffic. I wasn't a ghost anymore, I was the storm. And they had no idea I was coming. The sun at Camp Pendleton doesn't just shine, it beats you down. It turns the asphalt into a shimmering sea of heat and makes the air taste like dry dirt and diesel. I stood in front of the row of iron mailboxes, my shadow stretching out long and thin across the gravel. The hinge on box 402 screamed as I pulled it open. Nothing. Just a puff of hot air and a layer of fine dust. No gold-embossed envelope. No thick cardstock. No invitation to the Grand Belmont. For 3 months, I'd played the observer. I'd watched Victoria's life through the glowing screen of my phone like a scout watching an enemy camp from the ridgeline. She was posting every hour. The tasting at the hotel. The 400 guest count. The champagne towers that looked like they were made of liquid diamonds. She was building a kingdom of vanity. And she'd made it very clear there was no room for a ghost, the kind of silence that tells you the lie is being polished before it's delivered. I could hear the clink of a glass in the background. Probably an afternoon Chardonnay. "Oh, honey," she started, and I could feel the gaslighting coming like a storm front. "Victoria is just under so much pressure. You have to understand. This wedding, it's a specific vibe. And you? You have that military thing, that stiff, rigid way of moving. It makes the civilian guests uneasy. It makes people feel like they're being watched." I leaned my back against the concrete wall. It felt like ice against my spine. "Uneasy? I'm her sister, Patricia." I know, she sighed, her tone turning into that practiced, exhausted patience. "But Victoria wants her big day to be perfect. She wants light and fun and luxury. Your presence, it brings a weight to the room. It reminds people of things they'd rather forget. War, discipline, sacrifice. It just doesn't fit the brand. Stay at the base, Holly. Don't make this harder for her. Don't ruin her moment just to satisfy your own ego." "Put her on," I said. My jaw was locked so tight it felt like a piece of iron. "She's busy with the florist, Holly. Put her on." A few seconds of muffled noise, then a sharp, piercing sound. Victoria's voice. It sounded like a jagged piece of glass scraping against a chalkboard. "What do you want?" she snapped. I could hear music in the background, something loud and expensive sounding. "I'm in the middle of a seating chart, Holly. I don't have time for your drama." "Where's my invite, Victoria?" She let out a short, ugly laugh. "Invite? You're joking, right? You really think I'm gonna let you show up in some trashy olive drab uniform and ruin my wedding photos? This is a VIP event. The Ashford family's gonna be there. Marcus's partners from the firm. These are people with class, Holly, people who matter. No one wants to see a loser who spends her life in the mud standing next to me in white." I looked down at my boots. They were polished, clean, ready for a mission. "I'm your sister," I said. "You're a stain," she hissed. "You're the thing we have to explain to people when they ask why we aren't complete. You're the embarrassment we hide in the barracks. Stay in California, Holly. If you show up, I'll have security drag you out into the street. I won't let your failure rub off on my success. Do you get it? Stay away." The line went dead. The dial tone stretched out into the desert air, long and hollow. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. In the military, when a plan falls apart, you don't panic. You pivot. You find a new point of entry. You reassess the target and you strike where the armor is thinnest. Victoria thought she'd just slammed a door in my face. She didn't realize she'd just given me the green light. I walked back into my quarters. The air was still. I didn't turn on the light. I walked straight to my desk and pulled the bottom drawer. It opened with a heavy, satisfying metallic slide. I reached into the back and pulled out the small silver box. It was cool to the touch. The silver felt solid, honest. Inside lay the will, the document that proved I owned the very legacy Victoria was planning to parade in front of the world. $2.3 million worth of history and blood, all sitting in this small, quiet box while she called me a loser from her hotel suite. I ran my hand over the lid. I wasn't just a sister anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat or the stain she wanted to wipe away. I was the mission. I grabbed my civilian bag and started packing. No uniforms, just a simple black dress and the box. "Copy that, Victoria," I whispered into the empty room. I pulled the drawer shut. The sound was final, like a chamber closing. I had enough money to buy the hotel she was getting married in. I had enough truth to bury her 10 feet deep. Victoria wanted a wedding to remember. I was going to make sure it was the last thing she ever had. I checked my watch one last time. It was time to deploy. The hunt was officially on. The silver box sat on my lap like a loaded weapon. I was at the gate at LAX, the terminal humming with the white noise of people going places that actually mattered. I wasn't looking at the planes. I was looking back, 2 months back, to the moment the trap was set and the prey didn't even hear the snap of the metal. It was a Tuesday in Los Angeles. My office at Everlight Studios was quiet, the only sound the low, electric purr of the server racks. I was looking at a set of surveillance stills for a corporate security client when my private line buzzed. Caroline Ashford. She was 80 years old, Eleanor's closest friend, and the undisputed queen of Boston's high society. If you wanted a wedding at the Grand Belmont, you went through Caroline. If you wanted to ruin someone, you prayed she didn't find out your secrets. "Major," she said, her voice like fine sandpaper over silk. "The fish is on the hook." I leaned back, my eyes tracking the dust motes in the California sun. "Status report, Carolyn." "Your sister is spiraling," Carolyn chuckled, a dry, sharp sound. "She's obsessed with the brand of this wedding. She demanded the most elite studio from the West Coast. She told me she wouldn't settle for local trash." I steered her toward Everlight. "She has no idea you own the name. She just saw the price tag and the LA address and signed on the dotted line." I felt a cold, jagged edge of satisfaction cut through my chest. Victoria was so blinded by the glow of a name that she didn't check who was holding the torch. "I've already approved the contract," Caroline added. "She's paying the premium elite package. She wants the best. She wants the world to see her through your lens, Holly. Isn't that poetic?" "It's more than poetic, Caroline. It's tactical." 10 minutes later, my head accountant walked in. He laid a thick folder on my desk. The paper was heavy, expensive. The smell of fresh ink was so strong I could almost taste it. "New client, boss," he said, tapping the signature line. $15,000 deposit, non-refundable. Wire transfer cleared 10 minutes ago. Some socialite in Boston. Wants the works. 3 lead photographers, a high-altitude drone team, and total secrecy on the pricing. I looked at the name on the contract. Victoria Berry. $15,000. Just for the deposit. I looked at that number and thought about the girl in the kitchen at Beacon Hill. 15 grand was more than my parents had spent on me for my entire childhood. It was more than the cost of every pair of boots, every school book, and every birthday I'd ever had combined. And here she was, throwing it at me like it was pocket change, just to make sure she looked better than everyone else for one day. Victoria was using her fiancé's family money to buy a reflection she didn't deserve, and she was paying me to build the gallows she was gonna stand on. But I needed one more piece, one more fragment of truth to finish the weapon. A week before I boarded the flight to Boston, Caroline sent me an encrypted file. It was a recording from Victoria's bachelorette party. The sound was messy, shouting, cheap pop music, the clinking of glasses. Then Victoria's voice cut through the noise, sharp and shrill like a blade on bone. "Oh, the pearls?" she scoffed, and I could practically see her tossing her hair. "They're mine now. Grandma left them to the person who actually matters in this family." My loser sister? Holly? Last I heard, she was probably scrubbing latrines in some dusty barracks in the middle of nowhere. She's a stain on the name. I'm the one who carries the legacy. Marcus's family wouldn't even let her in the building. She's better off in the mud. I listened to it 3 times. I didn't get angry. I didn't feel the heat in my face. I just felt the cold, hard weight of a mission reaching its final phase. I copied the file onto a flash drive and tucked it into the silver box, right next to the notarized will. The puzzle was complete. Flash forward. Present day. The doors of Logan Airport slid open, and the Boston wind hit me like a physical blow. It was aggressive, bitter. It smelled of salt and old regrets. I wasn't wearing my green beret. I wasn't wearing the medals. I was just a woman in a simple floor-length black dress, my hair pulled back into a tight, professional knot. I looked like a guest. I felt like a sniper. I gripped the handle of my black suitcase, the wheels clattering against the cold asphalt as I walked toward the line of taxis. I didn't call Harold. I didn't text Patricia. To them, I didn't exist. I was the stain they'd successfully bleached out of their perfect life. I pulled up to the Grand Belmont at 1900 hours. The hotel was a palace of limestone and gold leaf, glowing like a beacon in the Boston night. Valleys were running, doors were swinging, and the air was thick with the smell of wealth and lies. I stepped into the lobby. The marble floor was so polished I could see my own reflection, sharp, steady, and utterly unrecognizable to the people who shared my blood. I walked toward the concierge desk. I saw the look on the man's face, the confusion, the pity, just like I described before. He looked at the list. He looked at me. "I'm sorry, miss. Your name isn't here." I knew that. I'd counted on it. I walked away from the desk and stood near the mountains of designer gifts. I saw the Louis Vuitton boxes, the Tiffany blue, the mountain of vanity. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small silver box. I placed it right in the center. It looked small. It looked humble. It looked like a fuse. If you've ever watched someone talk down to you while they were unknowingly standing on your territory, hit that like button right now. Comment the word trap if you're ready to see the look on Victoria's face when the flash goes off and the truth finally hits the light. I turned on my heel and walked out of the lobby. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from my lead photographer, already inside the ballroom. Positioned. Cameras hot. The drone is in the air. We're ready for the shot, Major. I stepped into the cold night and let out a long, slow breath. The bomb was active, the guests were arriving, and Victoria Barry was about to find out that the sister she tried to bury was the one who owned the ground she was standing on. I'm sitting in seat 24B of a cramped Delta flight, 35,000 feet above the dark patches of the Midwest. The air in the cabin is thin, recycled, and smells like stale coffee and nervous sweat. I'm chewing on a dry, tasteless turkey sandwich, the kind of meal you eat when you're on a mission, not when you're celebrating. My eyes are fixed on the small flickering screen of my phone, watching the clock. 2100 hours, Boston time. 3,000 miles away, the Grand Belmont Ballroom is a different world. It's a palace of blinding gold leaf and crystal chandeliers that cost more than a veteran's pension. The air there doesn't smell like jet fuel. It smells like victory and expensive lies. I can almost see the scene unfolding. I spent 10 years learning how to predict an enemy's movement. I don't need to be in the room to know exactly how the trap snaps shut. Victoria is standing on a raised dais. She's draped in white silk, looking like a queen who bought her own crown. Beside her, Marcus looks stiff, uncomfortable in a tuxedo that's a little too tight around the neck. This is Victoria's favorite part. The public gift opening. The moment where she gets to measure her worth by the labels on the boxes. She reaches for the silver box. My box. She holds it up under the light of a 3-ton chandelier, the silver surface gleaming like a mirror. She taps the microphone with a manicured nail, the sound a sharp electronic pop that cuts through the chatter of 400 socialites. "Look at this, everyone," Victoria says, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness I've hated since I was 6. She lets out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoes off the high ceilings. "A little something from my sister, the soldier, the one who couldn't be bothered to show up because she's too busy playing in the mud. I wonder what's inside. Probably some government-issued food stamps or a couple of rusty shell casings. Ain't that just like her? The crowd ripples with laughter, a cruel practice sound. My father, Harold, chuckles from the front row, adjusting his gold watch. My mother, Patricia, sips her champagne, a thin, satisfied smile on her face. They're all in on the joke. They're all waiting for the punchline. Victoria grabs the silk ribbon. Rip! The sound is small, but in my head, it sounds like a fuse hitting the powder. She flips the lid open. She's expecting a cheap trinket. Maybe a handwritten note she can laugh at later with her bridesmaids. Instead, she pulls out a stack of heavy, cream-colored vellum. The notarized documents. The red wax seal of the Hartwell estate is bright, like a fresh wound against the white linen of the gift table. I take a bite of my dry bread. Keep reading, Victoria. The laughter in the room doesn't just stop, it dies. It's a sudden, suffocating silence that swallows the music and the clinking of glasses. Victoria starts to read. I watch the foundation of her face crack. The expensive primer and the layers of contouring can't hide the way her skin goes from flushed pink to the color of a wet sidewalk. The pearls on her neck, the ones she stole from Eleanor's dresser before the body was even cold, suddenly look heavy. I hope they feel like a noose. I hope they choke the air right out of her lungs. She turns to the second page, then the third. Her hands start to shake. Not a little tremor, but a violent, bone-deep shudder that makes the paper rattle against the microphone. Then, she finds the fourth item. The one at the very bottom. It's the contract for Everlight Studios. The $15,000 invoice she paid with the groom's family money. She sees the signature line. She sees the owner field. Major Holly Berry. Victoria's breath hitches. It's a wet, desperate sound that the microphone catches and blasts through the speakers. She drops the contract. It flutters to the floor, landing right at the feet of the man she's supposed to marry. Marcus doesn't wait. He reaches down and snatches it up. He's a businessman. He knows how to read a balance sheet. He looks at the name. He looks at the date. He looks at his bride. His eyes go wide, then turn into two chips of black ice. Victoria? He whispers, but the mic picks it up. What is this? You told me you hired an elite firm from L.A. You told me your sister was a degenerate. Victoria doesn't answer him. She can't. She's spiraling. Her main character world is burning down, and the smoke is stinging her eyes. She turns to the 400 guests, her veil snagging on the corner of the silver box. She looks like a ghost in a haunted house she built herself. Suddenly, she lunges for the microphone. She screams. It's a jagged, ugly sound that makes people in the back row wince. It's fake! She shrieks, her voice cracking, spit flying onto her white silk bodice. She's a liar. Holly made this up. She's a crazy person. She's got that PTSD, the soldier stuff. She got kicked out of the army for being a psycho. She's trying to ruin me because she's jealous of my life. She's pointing at the documents, her eyes bulging, her hair starting to come loose from its perfect knot. It's all lies, all of it. Harold, tell them she's crazy. But Harold doesn't move. He's looking at the ceiling, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shame. The 400 guests aren't laughing anymore. They aren't even whispering. They've all pulled out their phones. 400 lenses are pointed at the stage. 400 recordings of the golden child losing her mind in a white dress. Victoria is standing in a sea of flashes, her facade stripped away until there's nothing left but the small, mean girl from the kitchen in Beacon Hill. I close my eyes and lean my head back against the seat. The plane bumps through a patch of turbulence. She wants to talk about PTSD. She wants to talk about fake papers. Fine, let her scream. The louder she yells, the more the world sees the monster. My phone vibrates. A notification from the Everlight live feed. Victoria Berry. Target neutralized. Awaiting further orders, Major. I don't reply. I just turn off the screen and look out into the blackness of the clouds. The explosion is over. Now, we just wait for the witnesses to speak. The ballroom at the Grand Belmont went graveyard quiet. The only sound left was the jagged, desperate wheezing of Victoria Barry as she stood on that dais, her white silk dress gleaming under the chandeliers. She was a cornered animal, eyes bulging, clutching the notarized papers as if she could squeeze the truth out of them. Her scream about PTSD and forged documents was still ringing in the high-vaulted rafters, but nobody was buying it. 400 people, the elite of Boston, the men and women who ran the city, were staring. They weren't looking at a bride anymore. They were looking at a car wreck. Harold Barry stood in the front row, his face the color of old, curdled milk. He tried to fix his tie, his fingers shaking so hard he almost choked himself. Patricia was frozen, her champagne glass tilted at an angle that sent a slow, expensive drip onto the carpet. The silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that precedes an execution. Then came the clink. Caroline Ashford didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She tapped her crystal flute with a silver spoon. 3 sharp, metallic notes that demanded the room's absolute surrender. She stepped onto the stage with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who had seen empires rise and fall. She didn't wait for Victoria to offer the microphone. She reached out and snatched it from her trembling fingers with a cold, dry smile. "I am the legal witness to Eleanor Barry's will," Carolyn's voice boomed, steady and low, echoing with the weight of old money and older secrets. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked right at Victoria. "I sat in the room when Eleanor signed those papers. I watched the notary stamp them. Eleanor didn't leave this estate to you, Victoria, because she knew the difference between a legacy and a centerpiece. She left it to the only person in this family who actually stands for something. She left it to the major." A wave of murmurs hit the room like a physical blow. Victoria tried to speak, but her throat had closed up. She looked like she was drowning on dry land. "Holly is a liar," Victoria finally choked out, her voice a thin, pathetic screech. "Security, get these people out of here. Where are the photographers? I'm paying you. Do your damn jobs." In the back corner, a man in a sharp black suit stepped out from behind a limestone pillar. He wasn't holding a camera. He was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, feet shoulder-width apart. Military posture. The hunter. "I don't take orders from you," the man said, his voice carrying the rough, gravelly edge of a man who'd chewed through enough desert sand for 3 lifetimes. "I'm the lead for Everlight Studios. We don't work for socialites. We work for our CO, and our CO, Major Holly Barry, gave us very specific parameters for this operation." He looked at the other 5 photographers stationed around the room. He gave a sharp, nearly invisible nod. Simultaneously, they all lowered their gear. They didn't move. They just stood there, a wall of silent, professional defiance. The flashes stopped. The strobe lights hissed into darkness. The golden child was finally in the dark. "She told us to record the truth," the photographer continued, his eyes locked on Victoria like a sniper's scope. "We've got the bachelorette recordings. We've got the contract you signed using family money you didn't even have. We've got it all." Major Barry said the mission was to document the collapse. Consider it documented. The air in the room went cold. Richard Pemberton, the CEO of the country's largest defense contractor, stood up from the groom's table. He was a mountain of a man, smelling of expensive tobacco and pure, unadulterated power. He walked toward Harold Barry, his heavy boots thudding on the polished wood with a terrifying rhythm. "Your daughter runs a multi-million-dollar firm, Harold," Pemberton growled, his voice like grinding gravel. "She handles my company's strategic media. She's got a top-secret clearance and a record that's cleaner than yours will ever be." "And you told me she was a troubled dropout?" He leaned in, his face inches from Harold's. Harold shrank back, his pride evaporating in real time. "The judgment of this family ain't just bad, Harold. It's rotten," Pemberton said, his lip curling in disgust. "I don't do business with people who can't recognize an asset when it's standing in front of them. This marriage was supposed to be a partnership. Instead, I'm looking at a fraud." The final hammer fell from the groom. Marcus stepped toward Victoria. He didn't look like a man at his wedding. He looked like a man who'd just realized he was holding a live grenade. He reached down and snatched the Everlight contract off the floor. He scanned the signature. He looked at the price tag. 15 grand of his own family's money, spent to hire the sister Victoria claimed was a loser. You told me she was mentally ill, Victoria, Marcus said, his voice low, trembling with a cold, pure rage. You said she was dishonorably discharged. You lied about the money. You lied about the will. You lied about every single thing that matters. Marcus, please. Victoria gasped, her hand reaching out, her lace sleeve catching on a champagne glass. He jerked away as if her skin was acid. He tore the white carnation from his lapel and threw it at her feet. It landed in a puddle of spilled wine, white petals turning purple. The wedding is over, Marcus announced to the room, his voice ringing with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid snapping shut. Get out, all of you. Get out of my sight. He turned on his heel and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Victoria collapsed onto the white carpet, her expensive dress blooming around her like a wilted flower. The flashes of the 400 phones were the only things left in the room, recording every second of her ruin. 3,000 miles away, in a glass office in Los Angeles, my phone began to vibrate on the mahogany desk. A long, steady buzz that cut through the silence of the night. Mission complete. The wheels of the Delta flight hit the LAX tarmac with a bone-jarring thud. That heavy metallic jolt always felt like a period at the end of a long sentence. I felt it in my spine. I felt it in the bridge of my nose. Outside, the Los Angeles heat was already shimmering off the runway, thick with the smell of burnt rubber and jet fuel. The cabin lights hummed to life, that sickly yellow glow that makes everyone look like they've spent a week in a hole. I reached into my pocket and flipped the switch. The phone didn't just buzz, it went into a goddamn seizure. It rattled against the plastic armrest, a frantic, rhythmic vibration that didn't stop for 3 full minutes. I stared at the screen. 47 missed calls, 112 text messages, a tidal wave of digital trash. Most were from Victoria, voicemails that I knew would be a mix of high-pitched screeching and ugly, wet sobbing. I didn't touch them. I didn't need to hear the monster dying to know it was dead. At the top of the list was a single text from Marcus. I'm sorry, Holly. She lied about everything. Your service, the money, the will. It's KIA. The wedding, the house, the whole damn thing. Goodbye. I swiped left. Delete. I walked through the terminal, my black carry-on clicking against the linoleum. I didn't look like a woman who had just scorched the earth in Boston. I looked like a traveler who had finished a job. I caught my reflection in a glass storefront, back straight, shoulders square, eyes scanning the crowd. Habit. You don't spend 3 tours in a war zone and come home to slouch. The next morning, the sun hit the glass walls of Everlight Studios like a white-hot laser. My office was a cage of steel and reinforced glass, 30 floors above the smog. It was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get when people are afraid to speak. Sarah, my lead assistant, walked in without knocking. She didn't have her usual coffee cup. She just had an iPad. It went viral at 0200, she said. Her voice was flat, professional. I took the tablet. TikTok was a bloodbath. Hashtag Barry Wedding Disaster was trending at number 1. 50 million views in 6 hours. There was Victoria, caught in the sharp, high-definition lens of my own team's cameras. She was standing in the middle of that ballroom, screaming at the silver box, her face contorted into something jagged and unrecognizable. The comments were a feeding frenzy. Narcissistic bride gets wrecked. Justice for the soldier sister. The fallout was surgical. Victoria's firm had already issued a statement distancing themselves from her personal conduct. Her father-in-law's company stock was a red line diving off a cliff on the morning ticker. In a world built on brand and image, Victoria had just set herself on fire in front of the only people who mattered. I handed the iPad back. Status of the invoice? Fully paid, Sarah replied. The non-refundable deposit cleared, and Marcus's father sent the balance this morning, along with a note. He wants to know if you're looking for new investors. Tell him I'm busy, I said. 3 days later, the elevator at the end of the hall chimed. A heavy, expensive sound. I didn't have to look at the security feed to know who it was. Patricia Barry walked into my office like she was walking to the gallows. She looked older, a decade older. Her Chanel suit was wrinkled, and her heels, those ivory-colored shoes she worshipped, were scuffed and gray at the toes. Her makeup was a mess, a dark smudge under her eyes that made her look like a raccoon in a designer dress. She didn't look like the woman who had looked through me in the kitchen at Beacon Hill. She looked like a beggar. She stood in the center of the room, her hands clutching a quilted handbag until her knuckles turned white. She didn't say my name. She just looked at the glass, the steel, and the luxury of my life. "Marcus's family is suing us, Holly," she whispered. Her voice was a cracked, dry thing. "The venue, the catering, the reputational damage. They want it all back. Harold. Harold is in his office with the lights off. He won't speak. And Victoria? She's at a facility in Vermont. They say she's had a breakdown." I didn't move. I didn't offer a chair. I sat behind my desk, my hands folded on the mahogany. "Why didn't you tell us?" Patricia suddenly choked out, a sob breaking through her chest. It was a messy, ugly sound. "We're your parents. We thought you were struggling. We thought you were just a soldier. Why did you let us think you were a failure?" "You didn't think I was a failure, Patricia," I said. My voice was a flat line. No anger, no heat, just the cold truth of a situation report. "You needed me to be a failure. You needed a shadow for Victoria to stand in. It made the house look brighter." "That ain't true," she cried, her voice rising. "We did our best. You never complained. You never asked for help. You just did what you were told and stayed out of the way. We thought you were okay with it." I stood up slowly. I walked to the window and looked out at the Pacific. The water was a deep, bruising blue. "I stopped complaining when I was 10 years old," I said, not turning around. "Because I realized reinforcements weren't coming. I realized the only person in this family who was going to pull me out of the mud was me. You liked my silence when it was convenient for you. You loved it when it meant you didn't have to deal with me." I turned to look at her. She was shivering, her face wet with tears that didn't mean a damn thing to me. "Now that my silence is costing you money, you're suddenly interested in how I feel?" I shook my head. "The game is over. The chain of command is broken. I don't report to you anymore." "Holly, please!" She reached out, her fingers trembling. "We're family. Family sticks together, right? That's what you told me when Victoria needed $5,000 for a wedding she didn't invite me to." I walked over to the door and held it open. "The door ain't locked, Patricia. But don't you dare walk back through it unless you're bringing the truth. And we both know you ran out of that a long time ago." She looked at me, her mouth open, her eyes searching for a weakness she could exploit. She didn't find one. She turned and walked toward the elevator, her scuffed heels clicking a hollow rhythm on the marble floor. I closed the door. The click of the lock sounded like a hammer dropping on an empty chamber. I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. One more notification. An email from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Subject: The Hartwell Collection. I hit open. "The air in the basement of the First National Bank in Boston is 40 degrees and smells like ozone and dead air. It's a tomb for money." I'm standing in a small private room, the kind with heavy oak doors and a single flickering light that makes the shadows look like they're crawling up the walls. The safety deposit box sits on the table between me and a lawyer who looks like he hasn't seen the sun since the 90s. The box is heavy. It's cold steel, the kind that leaves a metallic tang on your skin. I slide the key in. The click is loud in the silence, a sharp mechanical sound that signals the end of a 28-year siege. Inside the Hartwell collection is a pile of frozen fire, diamonds, emeralds, sapphires the size of a grown man's thumb. $2.3 million of old Boston history sitting on a piece of cheap velvet. Under the fluorescent lights, they look hard. They look sharp. They don't look like jewelry. They look like the ammunition Eleanor saved up for this exact moment. I don't feel a rush. I don't feel like I've won the lottery. I feel like I'm looking at a pile of spent shells after the battle is over. I don't take them back to my hotel. I don't put them in my carry-on for the flight back to LA. Instead, I make one phone call. 2 hours later, I'm in a side office at the Museum of Fine Arts. The curator is a thin man with a nervous twitch, and he's staring at the emeralds like they're the Holy Grail. I push the box across the desk. I don't want the money. I don't want the shine. I want the story to stay where it belongs, locked behind glass where Victoria and my parents can never touch it again. The conditions are simple, I tell him. My voice is flat, low. The voice of a woman who stopped asking for permission a long time ago. A permanent exhibit, a small plaque. It stays in Boston. It stays under guard. And the name on the wall says, the Eleanor Berry Collection, for the silent soldiers. The curator nods, his hands shaking as he signs the deed of gift. I walk out of the museum and don't look back. I'm done holding her ghosts. I'm letting them haunt a hallway where people pay $15 to stare at things they'll never own. But there was one more thing in that vault. Back at the bank, tucked under the velvet tray, I'd found a smaller box. Cardboard. Cheap. Addressed to Victoria in Eleanor's jagged, upright handwriting. I'd opened it just to be sure. Inside was a string of plastic pearls. The kind you get at a state fair for $5. They were light. They were fake. They had that oily chemical smell of something made in a factory and sold to people who want to look like they've got class. There was a note. One sentence. For Victoria, this suits you. Shiny on the outside, light as air on the inside, hollow. I left it with the lawyer. Deliver this to her facility in Vermont, I said. Tell her it's her inheritance. 6 months later. I'm standing in my office in Los Angeles. The sun is a white hammer outside the window, beating down on the smog and the glass towers of the city. The air in here is cool, filtered, and smells like dark roast coffee and expensive electronics. The stack of mail on the corner of my mahogany desk is neat. Orderly. Harold's letters come once a month, like clockwork. Thick, cream-colored envelopes. I don't open them. I don't have to. I can guess the contents. Talk about family values. Talk about forgiveness. Talk about how the house feels empty now that the lawsuits have drained the retirement accounts. They sit there in a pile, a monument to a man who only realized I existed when his bank account hit zero. Patricia calls every Tuesday. I pick up every third time. I keep it under 3 minutes. I don't ask about the bridge club. I don't ask about the neighbors. I'm fine, Patricia. No, I'm busy. No, I ain't coming for Christmas. Take care. I hang up before she can start the waterworks. I've seen enough real tears in the field to know when someone is just auditioning for a role. Victoria is still up in Vermont. A wellness retreat, they call it. I heard through the grapevine she tried to sue the clinic because the thread count on the sheets wasn't high enough. Some things never die. They just rot in a different zip code. Marcus is gone, moved to London, last I heard. He didn't just end the marriage. He erased the Berry name from his life like it was a smudge on a window. I walk over to the window and look out at the Pacific. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and a pair of worn-in jeans. My old dog tags are tucked under my shirt, the cold metal sitting against my collarbone. A reminder of where I came from. A reminder of what I survived. People think revenge is about the fire. They think it's about the scream. But they're wrong. Real revenge is the silence that comes after. It's the perimeter you build around your soul that nobody, not even the people who shared your blood, can cross. I used the discipline they hated to turn my scars into a suit of armor. I turned their neglect into a multi-million-dollar empire. I didn't need to fire a single shot to win this war. I just had to stop pretending that their version of the truth mattered more than mine. I pick up my coffee mug. It's black, bitter. Just the way I like it. Mission complete, I whisper to the empty room. I turn my back on the window and walk toward my desk. There's work to do. New contracts, new missions. I'm Holly Berry. And for the first time in my life, I own every single inch of the ground I'm standing on. The screen of my laptop glows, ready for the next move. I don't look back. A soldier only looks one way.